Jay Kinzinger's love of wood, cycling, and his engineering background came together when he began building wooden bikes in 2011 and founded Sojourn Cyclery in 2015. He's been a hobby frame builder for nearly 40 years. Jay was awarded Best of Show in 2011 and 2014 and was the 2018 featured artist at the International Artistry in Wood show. Sojourn Cyclery was recently featured in the 110th anniversary of the Rolls Royce yearbook, a publication that was recently distributed to roughly 40,000 Rolls Royce Club members. Jay currently runs Sojourn Cyclery in Cedarville, Ohio, and is an instructor at the International Center for Creativity. Please welcome our speaker this evening, Jay Kinzinger.
Well, thanks for coming. See a lot of friendly faces out there that I've seen in the classroom before or in the future, so thanks. So just wanted to share a little bit about my journey and different things that have come along the way. This is my wife, Andrea. She's part of the story for sure. And so here we go. So I started building steel bikes out of steel, way back in the late 70s, early 80s. This was my first, it's called a lugged steel frame. I bought a kit that just had a lot of like tubing pieces and lugs and silver soldered it together. And the maiden voyage was the Bicentennial Trail, which goes from Yorktown, Virginia to Astoria, Oregon. So I really got the long distance touring bug. I was 20 years old. Somehow I talked my mom and dad into letting me take my 16-year-old brother with me. So anyway, we were green as grass. We wore cut-off shorts, for example. That's about the worst thing you could imagine, riding a bike long distance. But we did it. We had a good time. Kind of planted the seed of further adventures. So I continued welding and brazing bikes. When my family grew, I kind of made more and more seats on my bicycles. This was a triplet that I made. We call it Fluffy, from the three-headed dog in Harry Potter. So that's something we've taken a few adventures with. And this is kind of a unique tandem. I kind of feel sorry for little kids on tandems because they're basically staring at the backside of the mom or dad. So this is a tandem that's made so my son could sit up front and I could see over his head. And I was still steering, by the way. I wasn't going to let the 4-year-old steer. But so these are the kind of nonsense I did with steel bikes. And then something happened. Well, first of all, wooden bikes have been around for a long time, right? This is the very first bikes were wooden bikes. And you can see some of these from the Bicycle Museum in America. But my technician that works for me at Cedarville, he showed me this picture, or a picture similar to this, of a wooden bicycle made out in Oregon, a company that's now defunct, but it's Renovo. And I just went nuts, okay, because it combined two of my great loves, cycling and woodworking. So I dug really deep into their website and tried to figure things out. And about 400 hours later, I had my first wooden bike. So why would you choose wood? Of all the materials out there, what would be a good reason to choose wood? Well, it's sustainable, okay? If anything, it has a positive carbon footprint because you're growing trees and it's, so very, very sustainable. The fixtures that you use, like when you build a metal frame, you're using a welding torch, so the fixtures have to be metal. Like this one, but you can use inexpensive and kind of flammable fixtures for building wooden frames. This is just a list of material safety data sheets necessary for both categories. You can see silver-brazing has 17 items of potentially hazardous materials that go into making one, whereas the wooden frame has, 4 items and very non-toxic items. I wouldn't want to drink the epoxy adhesive, but about anything else, you could probably ingest it without major problems. And a wooden bike is easy to touch up. It's just a matter like a metal bike. you're talking about a couple $1,000s to get a metal bike repainted. It's not a cheap process. But with a wooden bike, you just break out the oil and a rag and just kind of wipe it on, and that's all there is to it. There's a lot of good design flexibility with a wooden bike. Here's a similar bike that I made for my son sitting up front, but this one actually packs into a suitcase so you can travel with it. And this illustration over here just shows the variety of sizes needed for different sized people. And you can address all of that easily with a wooden bike. You can do things with a wooden bike that are hard to do with metal, like you can taper the tubing or you can curve the tubing. So it lends itself to a lot of design flexibility. These are some creations that my students have made. One of my students was a triathlete, so he made a tri-bike out of wood, somewhat aerodynamic. That's my bike that I ride all the time, so with a wooden water bottle cage. And then I made a unicycle too, so a lot of variety. This is a tandem. This one actually resides in the Bicycle Museum of America. You'll see this further on in the story. Some other arguments for wood. You don't really need to know how to weld. Welding requires a pretty steep learning curve, so with a wooden bike, you don't need to know how to weld. Cold forming is the metal frame worker's dirty little secret, because they'll weld something, and anytime you weld metal, it's going to move a little bit, warp. So what they do is they'll get a big old pipe and they'll stand on the frame and they'll leverage it to get it back into the right spot. So you don't have to do that with wood. Relatively inexpensive raw material, and aesthetics. It's hard to argue with that. They're pretty sweet looking, but this is really an amazing feature. They're very, very smooth to ride because the wood absorbs road vibration. Why not wood? Okay, well, it's not for the weight weenies, okay? I can't compete with carbon fiber for a lightweight frame. I'm in there with like aluminum frames or lightweight steel frames, but I can't compete with carbon fiber. So if you're really, really into a lightweight bike, this isn't the best choice. It does require a little bit of maintenance, but the good news to that is you can do it. You know, like I said before, it's just a matter of getting a rag out and wiping some oil on. And it takes a sick amount of time to make one, okay? I get that word from my sophomore in college son, you know, everything's sick or clutch or, you know. Okay, so is it strong enough? That's often the question, you know. Well, I did a fair amount of structural testing. I say I because I use this project as a capstone course for engineering students. So I had some minions involved here. And I would feel guilty about it, and I did sometimes, but then I thought, you know, if I was a senior in college and I had the opportunity to do something like this, I would jump on it with both feet. I see Johnny nodding his head there. You agree with that? All right, so we made a drop test, ASTM, American Society of Testing. Oh boy, what does ASTM stand for? American Society. I don't know. I forget. I used to know. But so we made a big old weight and dropped it, and it held up to the standard that a mountain bike has to take care of. And we did some fatigue testing, just kind of wiggled it, you know, and just to see what it would do. Many 500,000 or 50,000 cycles. And this was a static test where we just loaded it up. The load went right through the bottom bracket where the pedals go, so it would be akin to standing on the pedals. So we tried a steel frame first, and it began to buckle at 800 pounds, which is phenomenal. You know, that's really, really good. I was expecting less for this, but as you can see, it went right past that 800-pound mark. Oops. And this was an independent tester out in California. Let's see if I can make this work. Again, it's a different kind of fatigue test, but it passed that test. I need to shorten that slide. Okay. Field testing. Well, it's been through quite a few. So these are some guys, when they graduated, they did a fundraiser for the Safe Harbor House, and they rode their bikes across country to raise money. And 3 out of the 4 of those bikes were wooden frames. I made a 2.9er, which is like a mountain bike, and rode with a bunch of guys called Second Mile Adventures. For a portion of it, we didn't do the whole route, but right through the Grand Tetons. And you can see, I did a little bit of fly fishing, caught a monster. And yeah, this is the type of road that we were subjected to day after day. So it did have a shock on it, but yeah, that's the gang. My son and I took the tandem that I mentioned before on the Underground Railway. So this is what that route looks like. So it's going cross country the skinny way. And that's Ben. How old was Ben then, dear, do you know? 8 years old. And the way this, yes, sir. So it was just a fork, just a shock fork. It wasn't a rear shock. Yeah, good question. So this was a kind of a unique situation. We had this Honda Odyssey minivan that was on its last legs, had over 200,000 miles on it. Transmission was making some really interesting noises. So we decided that I'd put it on Craigslist down in Mobile, Alabama, and cheap, you know, like $700, and had all kinds of people that were interested. So I kind of lined them up, and we used the van to get down there, and there's Ben waving goodbye to our van. So it's kind of like what Cortez burning the ships in the harbor, you know. We're looking at this bike, and this is how we're getting home. So now there we are at the bay, the Gulf. And this is like life on a bike, you know. We brought tents and cooking gear, gourmet food like SpaghettiOs, I think. And yeah, people often ask if it's going to be, you know, what's going to happen in the rain. Well, we did this in May, and it rained almost every day, and the bike was never inside. It was outside, you know, pretty much 24/7. So this kind of shows you what the bike was subjected to. So at one point in Kentucky, we were having a lot of trouble with stray dogs. They don't like to restrain their dogs down there. So we went to Walmart, and we bought this little airsoft gun, which just shoots a little, like 6mm bullet. And Ben was in the back, so this became target practice. And he was my tail gunner, you know. And it was a total game changer. Are there any cyclists here? You know, dogs can be a nightmare, right? And we started slowing down so we could get a better shot. And here we are back home. So we did a European family vacation on travel bikes. I'm kind of cheap, so I figured out a way to make a bike that would fit into a suitcase, kind of come apart, and that way you don't have to pay the extra airfare for a bike. And this is what they look like, all assembled and ready to go. You can see the middle one is a tandem, so Benjamin, my son, was in the front, and the others are just single bikes, but again, fully loaded. And here we are along the Rhine River, just getting started. And we had big plans. We've been saving for this trip for like 10 years and planning things, and we were planning to go to, Germany and France, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Italy. Did I say Italy already? Okay. All right. So, but yeah, okay. So, and we had a family-sized tent, so it looked like one of those circus tricks, you know, when you pull up and all the clowns come out of the car. All this stuff came out of our bags. And this is what it looked like. Beautiful bikeway trails along the Mosel River. Those are vineyards going up the side, and perfect temperature, perfect weather. What could possibly go wrong? Oops, well, Ella had a big beetle land on her shoulder. and she just freaked out and lost control of the bike and flipped over the handlebars, and she broke her arm. She broke both arms. So we had to be wired up. We got to know all about the German social medicine system, and Ella spent 3 days in the German hospital, and pretty discouraging. You know, we're early into the trip, like 3 days in, and you know, there are times that I wanted to go home and times that Andrea wanted to go home, but Ella never wanted to go home. She wanted to stick with it. So fortunately, we had a Eurail pass anyway because we were going to train from France down to Italy. So we just leveraged the Eurail pass and we went to different places that we weren't even really planning to go to. Like we went to Berlin, which was absolutely fascinating. And we spent a fair amount of time just all to kind of get Ella so she's ready to ride again. So what, about a week or so we did that, or 10 days? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, here she is in the hospital. Yeah. So here we are using the train system. Ella's in a sling. And it wasn't just her broken arm. She had a lot of scrapes and bruises. I called her Quasimodo because she's walking around, you know, through Paris kind of limping. And, you know, that's what dads do, right? So I had to do some rearranging. So I flipped the tandem around so that I became the captain on the front, and Ella would be the passenger on the back. And that left little Benjamin pedaling all by himself on one of these loaded bikes. And I've never been so terrified in my life riding a bike. Not, you know, because I felt like I had fine china on the back of my bike. You know, Ella already had these brakes, and I was really worried about Benjamin. See that little squirt up there? You know, that's him. And but it wasn't Benjamin I had to worry about. Anna, my youngest daughter, got a little too close to a curb, and her pannier caught, and she flipped over the handlebars and broke her arm. Okay, so we only had 75% of our arms at this point. And so, you know, normal people would go home, but we're not normal. And so it happened right by the Mosel River, and they just happened to have water taxis that go up and down the Mosel River. So my wife, Andrea, took the invalids on the water taxi, and she would go down about, you know, 30, 40 miles, and then I would ride with the other two that were able to ride, and we'd kind of leapfrog all the way down until we ran out of river in Trier. And at that point, we had to kind of stow our biking gear, and we just used the Eurail system exclusively. We still, I mean, we salvaged the trip somewhat. It was supposed to be 8 weeks. We spent 6 weeks, and we got all kinds of crazy stories that came from that trip. Gosh, when was this? Probably 2015? No, it was pre-COVID for sure. 18, probably 18. Benjamin and I took a trip on. He's grown a little bit since the Europe trip, but we pedaled what's called the Washington Parks Loop. It's just a big loop that goes and hits a lot of the national parks in Washington State. You know, I'd ridden cross country, and I've always said if you want to see the whole United States in one state, you know, hit up either Oregon or Washington, because it's got, you know, mountains, deserts, got ocean, farmland, it's all there. So getting some good fish and chips there at probably the San Juan Islands. I think that's where that was. Yeah, and this is just some scenic. It was a beautiful trip. We had a great time. So an e-bike is an endeavor that we did in conjunction with the ICC and the business department. And so we had teams from each discipline. It was the first entrepreneurial project that the business department had, and it was really a lot of fun. The ICC had several options to choose from for the frame, and they came up with that kind of really cool line. And then the engineers worked on it. So that was a really fun endeavor. Got a little bit of notoriety. I don't know if you guys watch PBS woodworking shows, but that's Scott Phillips there standing next to me. He has a show called American Woodshop. And if you Google wooden bikes, PBS, you can probably see this clip. I hate to watch it, of course, but anyway, it kind of focuses on all my students and their role in developing the wooden bike. Okay, so we also do workshops, and I found this to be a really fun part of the business because you get to know people and you get to meet people that you wouldn't meet otherwise. Our first workshop was a little bit ambitious. We flew out to the Bay Area, and these are all Apple employees. Somehow they got caught wind that I do these workshops, and they paid our expenses to get out there and put the workshop on, and that was a unique situation. Some more workshops. This one was done in Indiana, and here's a whole lineup of wooden bikes, all of them produced from a workshop. So we like to do a Young's Run to celebrate, right? This is Adrian. Adrian is his trade is he's a joiner, which would be a finished carpenter in the States. He's really into woodworking. He'd been watching my website for a long time, and really wanted to make a wooden bike. And he actually started making one on his own, but he just kind of ran out of steam. And I said, well, come on over, we'll do a workshop together. But he wanted to take it from ground zero. He wanted, start with wooden planks. So he flew, he got a flight into Philadelphia, kind of far away, right? And he had an empty bike case that he flew with him. And he was able to ditch that off, and he rented a car and drove to Cedarville. And this is literally what we started with, just the components and boards. And he ended up staying with us. He stayed in our house, and we just had a great time, learning all the little, English slangs, and, just had a riot. And he spent, I think, what did I say, 10 days or maybe more. But he wasn't working real fast. He would spend a day at the Air Force Museum or, whatever. But we just developed a really special friendship. This still goes on today, So having rented the car, he ditched the car here in Fairborn and built his bike and basically pedaled it back to Philly, going down this is called the Gap, Great Allegheny Passage. And so, yeah, pretty ambitious. Come to the States with boards and end up riding your boards back to Philly. So, yeah, this is some more pictures of him. So here's just some glamour shots of the tandem. This is a gravel grinder. That picture was in that Rolls Royce yearbook that was mentioned earlier. This is a recent, this guy did a workshop about a year ago, a Cedarville alum actually. He became an anesthesiologist, and so his wife bought him this experience for his graduation. This is one that just went out to the West Coast. What's kind of cool about this is it's got the wireless shifting, so it runs off of Bluetooth. So it's just a matter of pushing a switch and the derailleur changes. No cables involved. And this was for a guy that he just wanted something special. He never owned a car. His wife had a car, but he would ride his bike. He was an avid commuter in Baltimore. Okay, so that's not an easy place to commute. And so he was interested in doing something special for his ride for the commute. It's got wooden fenders, and I didn't make the fenders, but the guy in Oregon called Woody's Fenders makes them. And this was just last summer. Andrea and I were in Utah, so that's the Great Salt Lake in the background. This is Antelope Island. Really pretty nasty place, actually. The mosquitoes and I mean, we had fun. We happened to hit it just right, but there's only about a week of the year that's somewhat tolerable. They have these little shrimp, the brine shrimp that, oh, they're nasty. So it's something you wouldn't want to swim in that water for sure. And I'll take questions now.